All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome. We are here with David Kim from Uncapped Games. There's been a lot of people kind of whispering and saying, what is David Kim doing over at Uncapped Games? What's going on? And it seems like you guys are finally ready to start talking to the world and showing stuff. So thanks so much for coming on, David. How are you going, mate?
Yeah, really good. And thanks for having me here.
You guys have been, I think, the most mysterious of kind of the highly anticipated upcoming RTS studios, and you guys have now kind of getting to that point where we've just had this documentary come out, kind of showing you guys off and your passion in the background of your team. So, what was it, like getting together as a team at Uncapped Games, and what was kind of the initial vision that you guys were founding around?
Yeah, so our vision was to try to create an RTS game that both RTS players as well as maybe other types of strategy gamers in general that can play, right? And maybe we can look at it in a few different ways. First is we wanted to make sure that we kind of capture the core fun and only the core fun of RTS and bring it into this type of game, right? And second is, are there ways we can kind of amplify the fun in a new way that hasn't been seen before in RTS, right? And the third, and maybe the more controversial of the three, is can we remove as many, I guess, tedious clicks required to play or tedious actions required to play, etc. So anything that falls in the category of things that don't get in the that are not part of the core fun, but they're just added clicks to make the game more difficult to play. This kind of thing we wanted to remove.
I love hearing that because you obviously have a rich background in RTS. These are things where I think for decades now we've been playing competitive real-time strategy. You have as well. You're famous for being, the first very high level player with all three races in StarCraft 2 when you were on the multiplayer design of that. But you go back more than a decade before that as well, competing in games like Dawn of War and that sort of thing as well. Before we get too deep into, what those problems are and stuff, maybe we can just take a very quick rewind of your history. How did you get into game design? I remember there was a story about you being a pro Dawn of War player. Is that correct?
Oh, no, no. That was our other designer that we have over here. But mine is, so I've always been a massive fan of RTS, right? So I think when I was in middle school, PC rooms started coming out in Korea for the first time. So like every day after school, we would go and play, right? And there were two choices at the time when PC rooms first opened up, Red Alert 1 and Warcraft 2. And for whatever reason, Red Alert was kind of the popular one back then. So we played for a long time, like maybe, I don't know, 6 months to a year. And then StarCraft 1 came out. And at first, me and like my group of friends, we were thinking, oh, like we're like the best at Red Alert, right? Like we're not gonna play this new game or whatever, right? And then like maybe another 6 months later, we realized like, wait a minute, like why are there like so many PC rooms in every single neighborhood all of a sudden? And like pretty much 100% of the people are playing Brood War, not this Red Alert game kind of thing, right? So we gave it a try and our minds were like completely blown, right? Like so amazing. Like at that time, like asymmetric races, or I think it was the first time that it actually happened in a RTS game kind of thing, right? So played a lot of that. And when I went to college in Canada, that's where I kind of started getting into the more competitive side of things, right? So I competed on the, I think it was Game Eye Ladder. It was like a third party, more hack-free, like map hack-free type of atmosphere, right? So I was ranked quite high there, and I tried to participate in as many tournaments as I can, both in StarCraft 1 and in Warcraft 3. So like local tournaments, or when I visit Korea, like anything that non-pros can participate in, I would go and participate, etc. Right? And then one day, at like a local tournament in Vancouver, I happened to just beat someone that was quite good at the time. Like he did quite well in one of the very first like Blizzard sponsored like world tournaments or something like this, right? And his friend was there, and he was super impressed because he thought like, oh, my friend is the best in Canada or whatever, right? And then like, who's this guy that whatever, right? So he offered me a job at Relic Entertainment. That's how I got kind of my foot in the door in the industry. And then maybe fast forward another couple years, I saw this like announcement that they did in Korea of like, oh hey, like we're starting to make like StarCraft 2 now or whatever, right? And then that same day when I got home, like I had to work on the resume, like submitted it, and then maybe a few weeks later I got the job, came down to Irvine. I've been living here ever since. That was like 2007, so that's already almost like 20 years ago now, right? Yeah, and that's how I got into the industry. Like StarCraft 2, my dream game, so I worked on it from 2007 all the way until I wrapped everything up. I think the final expansion was done. The first major patch
Yeah.
of Legacy of the Void was done. So I felt like, yeah, time to kind of take the next step. And what I really wanted to do was take a stab at kind of that next RTS, right? Um, and I guess different stuff happened. Like I feel like I pitched the game idea to so many different people, different companies, etc. But Uncapped is where I ended up, and that's what brings me here today, I guess. Yeah, we've been working on the game for a little bit less than 3 years now. We've gone through the first community summit, we finished our first alpha test, etc., and we're looking at the game announcement and closed beta soon.
I mean, that's such a journey, and it's really cool as well. I love that whole journey of, we're the best at this game to getting into the bigger pool and realizing just how much depth there was. And especially in Korea in StarCraft 1 at that time, that's a truly unique moment, I think, in terms of gaming history, where an entire youth of a country is playing one video game and getting very good very quickly.
Yeah.
So you worked on other games and then StarCraft 2 as well. Obviously, this gives you a lot of experience. I definitely think the first thing that's a lot of the audience listening will be thinking is, oh, okay, so, you seem to be someone who is very kind of multiplayer oriented. You're very much focused on there being like a fun interactive experience between players. If we can just go straight in, let's talk about what do you think are some of the downsides, the limitations, of the games in the 2000s, StarCraft 2 in the 2010 onwards. You talked at the start briefly about, trying to remove maybe certain unnecessary actions and focus on the necessary ones, and really trying to remove the barriers to the funnest part of the game. Is there any way you could describe what for you the funnest part of the game is?
Yeah, for sure. Maybe at a high level, I could describe it in two ways, right? First is the strategy of RTS, like making moment-to-moment strategic decisions on a real time, and the person that does that better is the winner. Like this is a critical one, right? And the second one is kind of the execution part, right? So maybe you can look at it as like micro is part of this, right? But it's not just that. It's also like the decision, the moment-to-moment decision making of say like I'm gonna control this specific group of this size at this location, this other specific different group at this other location, and I'm gonna win. So like this is kind of strategy too, but it's also execution too. So there's like a bit of a gray area, right? So, but I do think these two things are the fun factors, and maybe some examples of like what I would consider or what we at Uncapped Games would consider as kind of more tedious actions is things like, are gamers really playing RTS games because building a worker from every single nexus every X seconds of the whole game, like, is this really like, oh my god, like I get such a kick out of like building workers all the time kind of thing, right? Like some people, yes, right? But if we're looking at the majority player base, we have a hard time believing something like this is the reason why, like oh my god, RTS game's so great because every X seconds I get to press like E to build or whatever, right? So hopefully that kind of answers maybe at a high level.
Yeah, I know. I think that's a really good starting point. What's interesting is because I come from, you do as well, a very hardcore gamer section. We are a very small section of the player base. And I think it's important that you recognize this and I recognize this because for me, there is an innate beauty to building supply depots and having it finished just when you're about to get supply blocked, or managing my 130 villages in an Age of Empires 2 game and having all my resources and migrating to new gold patches and making sure my houses finish just on time and making sure, the units are producing, but there's only one in a queue, so I'm using the maximum spending potential. But as you said, that's a bit of you wrestling with the game to a certain extent in terms of like there's so many extra actions, and as much as that adds depth in terms of the prioritization, the where is my attention going, it is not as interesting in terms of the other side. People would often say too much of that prohibits the pure strategy, the decision making, because, well, if you're not good enough at getting, your houses and your supply depots on time and keeping your unit production up and migrating workers, then you simply cannot come anywhere close to competing with someone of a higher level. Now, that being said, we don't want to completely remove that, I would imagine, in terms of like, oh, there's no prioritization. I guess for me personally, I would imagine the army management for me feeds more into the fantasy of RTS, like being a general and controlling your army and that sort of stuff. Do you think that's something that or anything that feels more like it's directly interactive with the player is something you guys would prioritize over, say, macro tasks that feel a bit more mundane?
Maybe let me say a couple things, right? First, before I answer the question, maybe a reason why we have this thought over here kind of thing, right? So if we look back, right? So like I was working on StarCraft 2 for X number of years. We're maybe in the middle of like Heart of the Swarm development, or maybe it's launched already or something like this, right? So I've been there at least like 3 years or more, right? And then one thought kind of just that hit me, and maybe like I feel like someone like you might resonate well with this type of feeling, right? Which is we love RTS, like especially something like StarCraft 2, like one that requires like 300 APM to compete at the master level or whatever, right? This is great and it's awesome, right? But on the back of my mind, it was always like, hey, but what about these other games that are doing so much better, right? Like, why can't the rest of the world see how great RTS is, kind of thing, right? And all these barriers that exist, like building supply depots, workers, like 300 APM, etc., those are kind of getting in the way of like normal players experience the core fun. And maybe another way to look at it is this, right? Like when I look at people across different skill levels playing, like whether that's internal, maybe within the dev team or within Blizzard, or just my friends that are playing, etc., right? Like the question that kept popping up to my head was like, are they really playing the same game, or do they just have like this fantasy of like, oh, I'm playing like this cool game that I love, that I watch the pros play, but like I can't even build enough of an army for, say, like the strategy to even matter, etc., right? So this was, I want to say, maybe kind of the start of why so it's like a mix of like, I really wish like other people can like experience this fun too, and then maybe on a separate part, it's kind of like, I mean, there are these other like PvP online games out there, right, that are so much bigger than StarCraft, like Hearthstone, like League of Legends, etc. at the time, right? Like, why can't like my favorite game be that type of game too, right? Where like so many people love it, so many people play, etc. So this, I would say, like is our kind of more long-term dream, right? Like someday my hope is maybe RTS can get to that level, right? Too, and maybe so many people can enjoy it just like we do, kind of thing, right? So I just wanted to kind of say that based off of what you said, right? And then going back to your question, oh sorry, what was your initial question again?
So, I mean, well, just to touch on that before I bring us back to that, I'm actually so jealous of you because growing up in Korea, you got to actually play real-time strategy with people. The PC cafes, the PC bangs in my area, actually in Australia, popped off in the early 2000s as I was entering year 7th grade and so on. And I remember you just could not find people to play a Warcraft 3 or a Starcraft 1 game against. And the rare time, someone would come up and say, hey, I heard you play StarCraft, or I heard you play Warcraft. And we'd be like, oh my God, let's 1v1 immediately. But it was almost all Counter-Strike or some Half-Life mod, or then Dota when that got big. And the rare times we could play, it was often, I'd go, yes, we're playing a 1v1. And they'd host up an unlimited resources kind of big game hunter style map. And I'd go, oh, okay, we're not really playing the real time, like the pure version. Even the rare time you'd find someone to play, it would also still not be this similar to the competitive format. So like you said, with players playing different games, it's always been that way, where real-time strategy has had those barriers to entry, and it's always been like a small section of the player base. I compare it like tennis to football, with football being the more popular thing, but it's maybe even smaller than that in terms of classic RTS. So in that vein, I guess I was just asking about like, hey, what would you prioritize as the fun experience, and what things would you be a bit more willing to remove that maybe they do technically remove some areas of complexity in terms of strategy, but they may open up more chance for you to involve other areas of strategy?
So the constant moment-to-moment decision-making throughout the course of the whole game among the core, I guess, RTS fun factors, I would define as like the choice among like, am I going to expand right now to increase my income rate versus am I going to tech for this type of advantage or that type of advantage? Or am I going to build a bigger army instead of spending money in these other two areas right now to do something with that? Like I'm going to go for a harassment or a full-on attack, etc., or a rush, timing push, etc., right? So at a high level, just always thinking about like every minute of every moment that you're playing a game, constant decision making of these things, right? And then getting the, I guess, value out of those things. So like sometimes I decide to go for that attack, right? And then I'm like, maybe like I shouldn't have done that. Maybe like next time this sort of similar situation happens, I'm gonna tech instead, get my air unit out. I'm gonna do this or that with my air unit. Like this, I think is at the core of it, right? And then maybe in terms of what's getting in the way, it's really everything else that makes these three things difficult to do, right? So do managing buildings have to be so complicated or so difficult for an average PC gamer to do? Or can they just be done in a way that those are never getting in the way, no matter your skill level? Because there's plenty to master, there's plenty to explore, even with just I guess the strategic macro decision of like these three things that I just said. Plus there's a whole like micro element of it too, right? Like not just like blink micro, like of course those things too, but also the micro of like, okay, like at this specific timing, am I going to, I guess, retreat or continue fighting? Like even that is kind of like a micro management decision kind of thing, right? So maybe that kind of answers it well. Oh, and then the one thing that I want to add onto that is, if we are making a PvP focused online RTS, then we believe one of the most important factors is to have like as many action moments as possible within a given game, right? And this is to add to the, I guess, the replayability of the game. So like the example that I like to use all the time is like, imagine maybe like a StarCraft 2 match, right? Where the meta is I tech to whatever battle cruisers and you tech to swarm hosts with a bunch of whatever base defenses. So like there's no action, right? Because it's like I'm not going to attack into your swarm host with a bunch of spores and stuff like that, right? And then once I have my battle cruisers out, maybe I can like do this over here, teleport once or twice, and then maybe that determines the game or whatever, right? In this type of game, if you play 10 games using this strategy on either side, then every single game feels very similar. Versus if we're playing a different type of maybe Terran versus Zerg game where Zerg is constantly trying to kind of catch the Terran opponent off guard by like surrounding them with like a Zergling, Baneling Muta or something like this, and then Terran is constantly looking for this like, oh, how do I catch up in the econ? Like how I do that is like I do drops, I do like clearing out creep tumors. Like the more action points there are, the more different each of those games that you play will turn out, even though I'm using the exact same strategy all 10 games or something like this, right? So this heavily adds to the replayability. So I would say the macro strategy, the unit micro, as well as constant action, like maybe these three things are kind of what are the most important core fun factors of RTS.
I think that's fascinating because, as you say it lights up in my mind how, when it comes to core fundamentals of strategy in RTS, it's something in StarCraft, and I've been coaching StarCraft now for over a decade and commentating it, and I do a lot of interacting with my community, and it's kind of a bit of a meme, but it's about Diamond League where people start learning basic strategy, because up to that point, they're just learning kind of the mechanics of just build more stuff and, get a bit more map vision so you're not completely blindsided when his army comes out. Like people say, oh, I need to get better at scouting. And I'll say, well, just have a bit more vision on the map and build more stuff, because you need to get used to, as we talked about, kind of just building enough things and all that. And it comes as a second layer of things where suddenly there's really basic strategy stuff where it's like, hey, if you've just pushed to their side of the map and you've lost some units or your army's a bit smaller than theirs, you're never going to win a fight on their side of the map because their army's reinforcing quicker. You need to pull back to your side, try to use your defender's advantage where you've got the quicker reinforcements in a favorable position. And I see a lot of players who have played thousands of games of StarCraft, and they never really get to engage even in that sort of understanding because they're so busy just building lots of things. And I mean, it's very satisfying once they get past that stage, but the fact is most people will not make it past Gold League, right? Most people won't do that. So I always am fascinated to see what it looks like in actuality, how you can, allow that decision making to be there, because I think you feel so good when you go, you know what, I'm actually going to, my instinct is to push in here, but I know it's a mistake. I'm going to pull back. I'm going to take another expansion. And you know what? My opponent's going to be building this unit. I'm going to attack to this unit, which counters that unit. And if I'm right on that guess, I'm going to be way ahead. I think there's a really cool, satisfying part of decision making that layered on top of an RTS that still physically feels good to play is very interesting. And that's, like you said, that seems to be where more of the interaction and the things that'll keep you very busy on your actions are most exciting, which is the fighting, the interaction, the lots of kind of positioning back and forth in that regard. So that's, I think, a fantastic answer in terms of giving a bit of direction. And it's maybe a decent point for me to seg into to talk about my initial experiences coming over. You guys brought me and a bunch of other gamers over for your summit recently. And it's kind of funny because we'd heard nothing from you guys going into this at all. It was just kind of out of the blue. Hey, do you guys want to come and play test our game? Was it a little bit nerve-wracking exposing the very pre-alpha version of your game in this early stage to kind of a wider playtesting audience?
Oh yeah, absolutely, right? So before that point, we've had some guesses on how players of different types might react. So for example, we've been utilizing kind of our friends, family, previous coworkers, etc., for very small, like invite someone to my house and then you join our team play test once, kind of small setting, right? But what's kind of cool about having worked in this area for so long, as well as having so many of our team members that have also worked in different fields within this space for so long too, is we kind of had a good access to like such a wide range of, so like, for example, like a bronze player who's played thousands of games because they love RTS so much, right? Or like a gold, silver, like all the way up to like masters level even, right? Etc. So we've had our guesses, but we've also had some worries, right? Because like for example, one of the worries that we've had that didn't actually turn out to be the case, both at the summit and in the alpha, as you are probably aware also, was we were super worried that people find what we've done with RTS to be like unacceptable or like too much, etc. Right? But and then that's why, like, I don't know if you remember, but like before you guys started playtesting right on that first day, I just like honestly asked you like twice even, right, about like, please keep an open mind, like don't just this video, like this 2-minute video before you make up your mind, like please, like, open mind, play first, and then let's discuss a little bit later or whatever, right? But in hindsight, it almost felt like, oh no, like these guys, like for the most part, they all got it, like even at the pitch stage, or like after like a single or 2 games played stage kind of thing, right? So that was kind of like a funny, like, I guess, worry that we had, but maybe we shouldn't have been too worried about something. I don't know, right? Like,
Do you think
what are your thoughts on the observing end on the other side, right?
The gaming scene has changed a lot since you were fighting the StarCraft 1 community about multi-building selection, It's for those who don't know, there's a big drama as StarCraft 1. Part of the complexity in terms of where you put your attention was you can only click on one building at a time. And I think a lot of us, if you've cast your mind back, will remember having, 9, 10 hatcheries on a screen and quickly trying to press each one and build your ultralisks and press the other one and build the ultralisks. And that was part of the skill of the game. And that got removed in StarCraft 2. And that was a massive kind of drama at the time. But I guess now we're more than 15 years ahead of when that decision was made. And it does seem like the gaming audience and the RTS audience is a little bit more receptive to new ideas and realizing, I think, especially as people, get older and have kids and families and our friends aren't, in high school with as much free time, we're realizing like, hey, what can you do? Because everyone's gaming right into old age these days to make these games still super satisfying. You don't want to just dumb them down and make it a mindless thing you click on and it's like, oh, okay, it's not really that satisfying, but at least it's accessible. You still want there to be the heart of that feeling that you got when you were grinding games for 8 hours a day in your college dorm or whatever the case may be. So I think what's good about how you guys presented it is you kind of said, hey, we want that fun. We want there to be fun. You know, it was very much about like, let's try and get the experience there. And personally, you know, I was quite surprised because I think you guys have a lot of great ideas and just without being able to announce too many details, I know you guys are going to do the proper announcement coming up at I think it's Summer Game Fest, not too long in the future. But essentially, the gameplay loop was so incredibly tight. And I've never really, I don't know if I've ever even described a game that way, but it was so quick to get me into the fun and parts of what I love about RTS, even though it's obviously a different take and it's not the same flow as a 25-minute back and forth StarCraft 2 game or a 45-minute macro war in Age of Empires 2. It was a different feeling I got, but it still gave me an extreme version of some of my favorite parts of real-time strategy, I guess, is what I'd say. So I don't want to gush too much, but I was just surprised how quickly you got me into that experience, because every RTS I play, I almost always spend the first hour or two just clicking on units and trying to figure out how they move and do things. It was a little bit more seamless in terms of what you guys had to show of just figuring it out as I played the game. And yeah, it was something that definitely surprised me because I did not see a game being designed like this. So overall for me, I was very positive towards it. I'm sure you guys have got mixed feedback from different people. Has there been anything that's kind of changed your view on the design in any major way, or anything that's been interesting for steering the ship?
Yeah. There's a big one. But before I talk about that, maybe another thing I would add is, yeah, it was really cool because like one of our biggest goals was like, how about if we make a real, because like, you know how there's this saying at Blizzard for a long time, right? For decades now of like easy to learn, difficult to master, right? But I want to argue like RTS has always been, like even Blizzard RTS has always been difficult to learn, difficult to master, right? It's never been easy, right? And I guess the other thing, sorry, talking about your first question like, again, but another thing that was a big surprise to us was like, it wasn't just the RTS players that are kind of mirroring the sentiment that you just said, but also like the card game players or the MOBA players that we invited, they were also getting like super easy in like getting into the RTS space really easily with this game, right? And another thing is like within our own team, we've had team members join that never played like RTS ever before, never played MOBAs before either, right? And some of these guys who like really love the game and play in our weekly team play tests and stuff, like they're actually getting quite good. Like I want to say like some of these guys are getting to like that like platinum or like diamond level of play almost in StarCraft terms, right? And this is like unheard of. Like I worked on StarCraft 2 for like 10 years, right? And like I've never seen anyone improve from like silver to gold kind of thing, right? Like it just doesn't happen unless like you put your mind to it, like you practice these like APM drills or whatever, right? And then maybe after like 5 years, then maybe you can raise like whatever, right? I'm not saying it doesn't happen ever. Like of course, like people get better at StarCraft 2, right? But all I'm saying is within the small sample size of like a 50-person development team, I've just never seen that before, right? But here I've seen like multiple cases, which really gives us kind of like hope, I guess, right? Sorry, and then going back to your original
No,
question, I forgot what it was again, sorry.
I love it. I think that, you know, that's a very good, for me, that's a bit of the litmus test as well, is what can I see my real life friends improving at and getting into? Because like I have my one friend who's always going to be Diamond 3, doesn't play much these days, but whenever a new RTS comes out, he's always about that level. A lot of them are kind of bronze, silver level, and they'll always be around that level as well. So for me, yeah, it's generally like as well, like, you know, what can I get my mates who have multiple kids now and mortgages and all that stuff into playing on a Friday evening for an hour or two? What can I actually get my buddies to actually play with me in real life, you know, outside of my online full-time real-time strategy content creator friends, right? So the question was just, so you guys had some pretty good feedback in terms of that. Was there anything along the way that's like made you steer the ship in a big direction, or do you feel like overall the beginning philosophy you've kind of carried true to it and you've just made a few tweaks along the development process?
Yeah. The biggest one that was the biggest surprise to us was we did worry about I guess, the ceiling of mastery, right? But seeing players like Parting, Clem, etc., saying like day one, even saying things like, "Man, like the level of mastery required in this game is like impossible," or something like this, right? That was kind of surprising to us. But as we watch these guys play, not just at the summit, but also during the alpha too, and I'm trying to like imitate the higher level players playing too, we realized, oh, maybe we're already kind of there in terms of mastery ceiling kind of thing, right? So we had these like kind of more long-term plans to like, how do we make the game more difficult to master? Like, how do we add more complexity, etc. But we kind of had a kind of a realization where like, oh, maybe we're kind of good on that front. Maybe we focus on other things for now, and then once we've built up the player base, maybe after that point, we start worrying about like additional ways to like add depth, complexity, etc. kind of thing, right? So this was kind of, yeah, like we didn't expect like the highest level pro players to have this kind of like first reaction even kind of thing, right? But with that said, small sample size though, right? Like the alpha was extremely small. Summit was like 30 people, etc. So we're super looking forward to like, hey, like is this takeaway that we had, like is this even correct when we get into the closed beta stages, etc. Right? So we'll see, right? But immediately this one kind of comes to my mind as like, oh yeah, like maybe we were wrong about this space, seeing the reactions, seeing the level of play, etc.
That's funny. So it sounds almost like you were more worried because I think a lot of people they hear about new RTSs and they have nostalgia about growing up playing campaigns, but they go, all the new RTS just focus on multiplayer. That's all they focus on. And what about the casual gamer? What about the people who, yeah, we like multiplayer, but not what RTS multiplayer has been for most of history, you know, because it's too sweaty. We want the use map settings maps, the more casual custom games, and all this sort of stuff. Sounds like you weren't too worried about those. You were more worried about the other extreme, you know, the pro gamers and streamers and all sorts of reaction being negative, and that you'd maybe catered too much to the opposite side of the spectrum. Is that correct?
We do worry about both, and the reason is quite simple. We do want this game to, like, first and foremost, attract RTS players, kind of. That's our primary target, right? And like a bonus, maybe secondary or tertiary, like would be gamers like strategy gamers in general, mobile players, etc., kind of thing, right? And this is why we care about both. So maybe the easiest way to go to it is that like easy to learn difficulty. Like we do want to create a true RTS game that any RTS player, no matter which RTS you like, can at least try this out and get into it like as quickly as possible. Kind of like how you mentioned, right? How you got into it like so quickly, kind of thing, right? And then if they like this type of game or not, that's more second. Like we can't control that, right? Because like no one game is gonna cater to every single gamer of a specific type. That's just impossible, right? No matter how good or good the game is, or whatever, right? And but at the same time, there's also that dream of like, but can we show the fun of RTS to everyone else who's not already bought into RTS? This is why like both matter. And from the point of view of like, I guess your question is the reason why we were more worried about the hardcore RTS players specifically for the summit is because like majority of who we invited were kind of the more hardcore RTS players, and then we got the hardcore mobile players, the hardcore card game players, etc. too. But the context of the summit, I think, is what made our worries a little bit more focused due to that context.
Yeah, having a few StarCraft World Champions around and that sort of thing, it adds it's like there's hardcore gamer and then there's the very pointy tip of hardcore gamer right there, you know. It's definitely, you know, stressful for the first time, I'm sure, showing it off, but I'm glad it was well received, and it really has been interesting to see you guys come out of the woodwork, just immediately showing off something that already feels very good to play. So I don't want to tease the audience too much. Obviously, I just can't wait until more things are announced and we see the game kind of getting closer and closer to release. Is there anything specifically you're looking forward to in terms of the next few months and as it gets out to bigger playtests and then towards release? Is it just something where you're kind of saying, hey, let's just keep focusing on that core gameplay experience? Is there bigger feedback you're expecting? Any worries that you have once it hits, thousands and hundreds of thousands of potential players testing it out?
Yeah, absolutely, right? Like, we're looking at the announcement happening very soon, and I guess I can't lie. Like, the most exciting thing about it is just showing the core gameplay loop and seeing how players react to it. That is kind of the most, I guess, scary and exciting part of it. But also, um, the the cinematic that we'll be showing at our announcement, like, I don't know. So the pitch looked really good to me, right? Like really good. And then so my expectations were high, and then I was still mind blown when I actually saw kind of the work in progress, which it's not final yet. It's gonna be done soon, right? So I wanted to like test this at the summit too with some of the players, just to see like was I right or was I wrong, right? Because we showed you guys like a little sneak peek of the cinematic or whatever, right? So I grabbed a few people, like I think Crank was one of them, right? And then I told them something like, hey, like it's gonna be the best thing, like most awesome thing you've ever seen, kind of thing. Like so I tried to hype them up as much as possible to see like what would their reaction like. Is gonna be similar to my reaction where I was hyped, but then I kind of beat my expectations or something like this, right? And then sure enough, the couple to few examples, like they were like, man, like I thought I didn't like I think Crank said something like this, right? Like he said something like, yeah, usually when someone hypes me up, like I'm disappointed afterwards. But this time, like I wasn't really disappointed. Like it was still very cool kind of thing, right? So I'm like, oh man, like that's awesome, right? So I can't say that these few examples are what the majority would say, but I am very curious personally, like how would the world kind of view it, right? And then the biggest, I guess, question mark in our heads is, can we build enough of our own kind of player base who really loves and plays this game over a long period of time? And the lessons learned from whether we succeed or don't do so well from that will kind of open the path for kind of our next steps on the development side kind of thing, right? So scared, also excited, but at the same time, like I do feel like we will come away with valuable lessons either way. Yeah, and then go from there. And then we'll continue to chase that dream as long as we're allowed to kind of thing, right?
Amazing. I mean, I absolutely love hearing from you. And I think this is probably a good place for us to start wrapping up the interview because you know what? We've heard a lot now about your vision that you guys have had over there at Uncapped Games, what you guys have built so far. And we don't want to tease the audience too much. We want to say, well, the announcement is going to be coming up, I believe, over at Summer Games Fest. So everyone keep your eyes on that. And that's when you can finally start to hear, well, what is the actual product that's coming out? What is this gameplay loop? What's going on? What's fun about it? So I hope everyone can check that out. And hopefully I'll get a chance to maybe touch base with you over the coming months, closer to release, once it's in more hands, once there's more development to show, and maybe have a follow-up chat at some point before full release as well. So thanks so much for coming on, David. Was there anything else you wanted to touch on before we finished up?
Yeah, so I guess the ask is still the same, I guess, that we asked of you guys. Like if everyone checking out our game and playing it for the first time after the announcement when we go into closed beta, if what we've noticed is, I guess, there's two benefits to keeping an open mind, right? One is you'll be able to see what we're trying to do a lot better and clearer. And the second, maybe more important for players, is we've tested maybe with 100 plus people at least so far, right? Maybe more because we did alpha. Maybe 500 plus people now, right? And what we consistently see is people who come in with an open mind improves at playing this specific game so much faster than someone who comes in with like, I guess, preset expectations of how this game has to be or something like this, right? So like we think this happens because players who get caught up on some weird detail can't really like focus on getting better at the game, right? So there's like actually like real like player benefit to keeping an open mind too. So this is our kind of main ask of especially the RTS players that will try our game. And yeah, can't wait to hear your feedback and see how the closed beta goes.
I think that's actually a really good point, because just to touch on that, if I played it 4 years ago, maybe 6, 7 years ago, when I was literally just playing StarCraft 2 all day, that was the one game. I was playing almost no other games. I may have had a different reaction. I'm thinking, like, because I hadn't played as many different types of games. I wasn't as open-minded, but I've played so many different types of strategy games, 4X games, shooters, RPGs over the last few years. I've really broadened my gaming horizons, and I felt like I was very open-minded, and maybe that is part of why the game resonated with me, because it did feel like a very new thing. You know, people always, whenever a new game's coming out, they go, oh, this is like this other game or this other game. I don't know if there's a comparison like that with what you guys have shown me so far. So I think that's probably the best thing, is just go expect something new, and hopefully keep an open mind, and I'm sure some people will love it. Thank you so much for the interview, mate. All right, so it kind of sucks when I do a video like this that doesn't actually reveal what's going on in the game, but they've given me a list of things I can say. So without, you know, bloody getting blacklisted or anything, we've got a list here. How fun the game was for you. I'm allowed to talk about that. Well, I actually really enjoyed it. What was great about this summit is they just brought us in, put us down, and let us just play the game for 2 days. And I actually had a lot of fun playing it, and kind of was missing it and wanting to play more afterwards, which is a pretty good sign. General feelings on the gameplay and strategic depth so far. I think in some areas the strategic depth is lesser than classic RTSs, but I think in some it's just as deep, maybe even deeper in some regards, but more importantly, you get straight into that strategy way easier and quicker. I feel like with a lot of RTS games, I'm kind of trying to figure out what units do and zooming in on things and reading tooltips. I felt like I got into the strategy very quickly, and I was figuring things out as I was playing the game, which I haven't really experienced with another RTS. Normally, most RTSs, I get frustrated. I kind of just read tooltips and sit in a custom game against AI or against no opponent for like an hour. Didn't have to do that to start feeling like me and my opponents were kind of playing the game and figuring out how the units work against each other. The feel of combat, unit control, readability, and responsiveness. It was very good on all of these. Yeah, basically the readability, it was very clear visually. They've got some great artists working over there at Uncapped Games, and it was very smooth to play. So no complaints, none of that sluggishness that we've had in a bunch of RTSs in the last 10 years. Whether I'm looking forward to playing more, already answered that. I am. I do want to play more. Things we'd like to avoid talking about. Oh, that's the list I'm not meant to read. Sorry, guys, I can't talk about those ones. Anyways, hopefully that shares some insight. As I said, it still sucks to not show you more. This is like an announcement of an announcement they're doing, where they're kind of going, hey, we released a documentary. We've done this little summit to help playtest and fine-tune things. But it's June 7th is when they're finally going to actually show the game to the world. And I'm personally very excited because I got this like kind of tailored experience. I get to sit down and play the game as my introduction to it. Whereas a lot of you, you're probably just going to be seeing it and seeing trailers and things for it before you get a chance to play it. And I'm really curious to see how you all receive it and if you are as excited as I am after playing it for a couple days. Anyway, let me know what your thoughts are down below, and let me know if you think David Kimmett and the Uncapped Games crew are able to compete with the big boys of RTS. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next one. Goodbye and good night.